Beneath the heavy, time-worn beams of the Tower of London, the late spring light filtered in through narrow slits, painting golden rectangles across cold flagstones. It was early June 1843, and the city beyond the curtain walls was restless with rumors. But inside the royal apartments, the air was still. Edward V, only 12 years old, sat at a window, his slender fingers tracing the edges of a vellum page. He was restless, his pale face pressed close to the glass as he tried to catch a glimpse of ravens circling above the inner ward. Nearby, his younger brother Richard, Duke of York, barely 8, knelt on the floor with a carved wooden knight, its red paint scratched from years of play. The brothers spoke in hushed tones, their laughter muffled by the weight of uncertainty. Their attendants moved quietly about the room, careful not to disrupt the prince's study or the younger's games, straightening tapestries, folding linen, and glancing at the door as footsteps approached. Outside, the bell from St. Peter ad Vincula tolled, echoing through the thick walls, a constant reminder of the world's turning. A servant entered with a tray of marchpane and watered wine, bowing deeply before setting it on the coffer that served as a table. Edward accepted a piece, breaking it in half and handing the larger portion to his brother, who grinned, his mood momentarily lightened. From across the chamber, their tutor, John Argentine, watched the exchange with a fleeting smile before returning to a Latin text, his eyes darting up with every disturbance from the corridor. Shouts rose from the ward below, men-at-arms drilling or perhaps a scuffle over a misspoken word, and the sound made both boys pause, hands frozen over sweets and toys. Edward's gaze lingered on the shadowed archway, as if expecting their mother, Elizabeth Woodville, to appear and gather them up, as she had done in the safety of sanctuary at Westminster. But this was the Tower, not sanctuary, and every creak or murmur seemed to remind them of their isolation. Outside their chamber, guards in the livery of the Duke of Buckingham exchanged quiet words, their halberds resting against the whitewashed wall, eyes wary as they surveyed the passage. Within, the princes clung to the small rituals of comfort. Shared bread, a favorite game, a gentle word from an old tutor, unaware that these moments of innocence, fragile and bright in the shadowed chamber, would soon be all that remained to mark their presence within these ancient, unyielding stones. As the summer of 1483 unfurled over London, the city thrummed with unease. Mud-caked carts creaked over cobblestone streets, carting barrels of salted fish and bundles of firewood past the high stone walls of the tower, where the young King Edward V and his brother Richard, Duke of York, remained confined within the fortress's ancient keep. Outside, the citizens of the bustling metropolis grappled with a climate of suspicion and fear. Fishmongers at Billingsgate Market whispered speculation as they weighed eels and pike on their brass scales, casting wary glances at passing retainers in Richard, Duke of Gloucester's livery. The great bells of St. Paul's tolled the hours, reverberating over dense clusters of timbered houses with pitched roofs, while scullery maids hurried through alleyways with baskets of bread, their eyes lowered when royal soldiers marched by, their chainmail glinting in the gray daylight. Within the city's guild halls, murmurs of unrest filtered between tanners and goldsmiths, worried over rising taxes and the uncertain fate of the kingdom. Meanwhile, the lords and councillors gathered in private chambers hung with tapestries, their meetings increasingly tense. Letters sealed with wax changed hands by candlelight, missives from Elizabeth Woodville, the boy's mother, who remained sheltered in Westminster Abbey, and from Buckingham, now a key ally of Gloucester, who urged decisive action. The tension was palpable outside the tower's outer walls, where crowds sometimes gathered, hoping for word of the princes. Mothers clutching children peered across the moat, straining for glimpses of regal figures at the narrow windows. Yet as days stretched into weeks, their hope curdled into anxious silence. The city's ancient churches held masses for the safety of the royal heirs, the air thick with incense and the muttered prayers of the faithful. Armed patrols paced the city gates at dusk, while rumors seeped through the taverns and stews, sowing confusion and dread. Candle makers and scribes, their hands stained with wax and ink, passed news from neighbor to neighbor. A guard bribed, a servant dismissed, a glimpse of a figure at a window. The heartbeat of London quickened, its people drawn inexorably into the shadow cast by royal ambition and the boy's unseen captivity. In every corner, the pressure mounted, shaping the city's every gesture and breath, as Edward and Richard vanished from public view. Within the imposing stone walls of the Tower of London in the late spring of 1483, the daily rhythm of life for Edward V, the 12-year-old king, and his younger brother Richard, Duke of York, became a study in contrast to the bustling world outside. In the cool, echoing chambers, the boys spent their days attended by a small circle of servants, loyalists appointed by the crown and vetted by their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. The thick tapestries muffled the sounds of the city, but every so often, the distant clang of blacksmiths along Tower Street or the shouts of watermen on the Thames would drift through narrow arrow-slit windows. On market days, the scent of fresh bread and brine from barrow women peddling fish would mingle with the tower's ever-present must of old stone and burning rushlights. The boys, dressed in fine but somber doublets of damask and velvet, sometimes watched from a latticed gallery as squires sparred below in the ward, or sat at table in a wood-paneled chamber, picking at trenchers while a silent yeoman poured watered wine. Each evening, as dusk closed in and the braziers were lit, the courtyards fell still. City sounds faded to a low murmur, and the brothers' world shrank to the flicker of candlelight on carved oak and the soft tread of guards shifting in the passage. Outside the tower walls, rumors circulated along Cheapside and through the alehouses of East Cheap, whispers of plots, shifting allegiances, and the uncertain fate of the young king. Merchants in woolen gowns eyed one another warily at the foot of London Bridge, while inside the city's houses, families discussed the news in hushed voices over bowls of pottage. But within the tower, time seemed suspended, measured only by the dull tolling of the bell and the slow, heavy footsteps of men-at-arms patrolling the paths below. The summer of 1483 found London stifling under a haze of uncertainty as rumors spread like wildfire through its crowded streets. Within the stone walls of the Tower of London, young Edward V, just 12 years old, and his 9-year-old brother Richard of Shrewsbury, found their world narrowing to the small, torch-lit chambers assigned to them after their arrival in early May. The Tower, more palace than prison for royalty, pulsed with the comings and goings of high-ranking nobles and armed retainers, all under the watchful eye of their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. On a humid June evening, the critical turning point arrived with the abrupt dismissal of the boys' household attendants. Loyal men like John Argentine, physician, and William Slaughter, chamberlain, were replaced by strangers loyal to Gloucester. This calculated act, executed amidst the sharp echo of boots and whispered orders, severed the last link to their former lives and ensured the prince's isolation. That same week, within Westminster Hall, the city's leading clergy and lords were summoned in haste, their footsteps echoing on flagstones as Richard's supporters unveiled aged parchments and hastily gathered testimonies, alleging that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid, rendering his sons illegitimate. The city's bells rang early and late as messengers carried news to every corner, and Richard's retainers assembled in their livery, their badges glinting in lantern light. The boys, peering through narrow windows at the distant turrets along the Thames, could do nothing but wait, as their fate was decided in chambers and council halls they could no longer reach. In the days that followed, access to the princes was sharply curtailed. Tower warders changed shifts with increased vigilance. The clatter of keys and the dull scrape of metal bolts became daily sounds outside their rooms. The ordinary bustle of the royal apartments faded as the boys were kept from public view. On June 26th, under a sky mottled with summer clouds, Parliament declared Richard the rightful king. Across the city, banners bearing the white boar insignia of Gloucester unfurled above the crowds, while within the tower, the prince's world shrank to silence. The overt seizure of their guardianship, the legal stripping of their inheritance, and the sudden tightening of security around them marked the precise moment from which there could be no return. Every movement and every decision from that point set the course for their mysterious disappearance. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of Westminster Abbey, where sunlight filtered through ancient stained glass and painted the stone floors with shifting colored patterns, monks and courtiers alike paused in silent contemplation of the empty spaces where the young princes Edward V and his brother Richard should have stood. The year was 1483, and their absence, rendered more acute by the hush that fell over the royal chapels, echoed in whispered questions among those who dared not speak too loudly, wary of the flickering eyes of Richard III's informants. Chroniclers like Dominic Mancini, hunched over their parchment in candlelit corners, struggled to record the rumors. The sound of footsteps at midnight in the corridors of the tower, the abrupt departure of loyal retainers, the subtle shifting alliances at court. Across the London streets, mothers clutched their children's hands tighter, casting nervous glances toward the tower's looming silhouette as bells tolled the hours. The city's goldsmiths, bakers, and watermen gossiped over their tasks, debating whether the boys lived or died, each story told and retold, embroidered with the teller's own fears or certainties. In Windsor, a seamstress mending a threadbare cloak wondered if the princes slept cold beneath the stones, or if they'd been spirited away in the night, her needle pausing mid-stitch at each footfall outside. Tradesmen passing through the tower's byward gate eyed the yeoman guards warily, recalling the day when two pale faces peered from an upper window, then were seen no more. Even in the shadowed corridors of St. Paul's Cathedral, priests murmured prayers for the princes' souls, sometimes slipping their names into litanies for the dead. In these acts, mundane and sacred, fearful and reverent, the fate of Edward and Richard became woven into the daily consciousness of England, their disappearance a wound that would not close. The palpable uncertainty, the weight of unsaid words, and the careful coded gestures exchanged in taverns and on street corners left an indelible mark on those who lived through that fraught summer, ensuring that the prince's memory was not contained only in royal proclamations, but rooted in the frail, persistent fabric of ordinary lives, each whisper and prayer adding to the legend that would endure long after the last candle guttered in the tower's cold stone chambers.